Welcome to VSOW, and we don't stop. Today we're diving into Neo-Paganism. You might have heard about it, maybe saw it trending online, maybe even, felt it pulling at you yourself. But we're going to break it down. We've got a ton of articles, statistics, and expert opinions to get through so we can understand not just what it is, but why it's gaining popularity. And you know how it's shaping all these modern movements, especially around environmentalism and social justice.
What's really interesting is how it's kind of hard to put neo-paganism in a box. It's not one religion. It's more like a term for a whole bunch of different traditions. Think of it like a mosaic. Each piece is different, but they all fit together to make a bigger picture.
So let's break down some of those pieces. We're talking about animism, the idea that nature is full of spirits and divinity, and polytheism, honoring lots of gods and goddesses. Then there's magic, rituals, and likes. A deep respect for nature's cycles. It's pretty different from the organized religions a lot of people know.
And that difference, that's a big part of what makes it so appealing. They think the number of neo-pagans in the U.S. could triple by 2050. Almost 3 million people. And in the U.K., it's growing a lot, too. So something about it is really hitting home. Some experts say it's because people are disillusioned with the usual institutions. They see them as, like, failing to deal with the big problems we face today. The environment, inequality, and just like a general need for something spiritual.
So are you saying neo-paganism gives people a sense of control and power that they don't get from traditional religion?
Exactly, and especially for women. The resurgence of witchcraft and ecofeminism within neo-paganism, it gives them a way to take back spiritual authority and connect with a history of female power.
But wouldn't you say that witchcraft comes with,
well,
some baggage?
Of course. The historical persecution of people labeled as witches, often women who challenged social norms or had knowledge that was considered dangerous. It's a dark part of history, we can't ignore that. But a lot of neo-pagans are reclaiming that image of the witch. They're turning it into something positive: strength, wisdom, a connection to nature.
Okay, let's talk about that connection with nature. That seems to be like a really big part of neo-paganism.
Absolutely. The belief that nature is sacred and full of divine energy, it's fundamental to so many neo-pagan traditions. This perspective makes people feel responsible for the environment, connected to all living things.
Can you give us an example of how that plays out in the real world?
Sure. Think about the eco-activists in Ireland. When they protest against environmental damage, they're very careful not to offend the spirits they believe live in the land. They perform rituals, they pray. They really try to honor the sacredness of nature. It's this blend of ancient beliefs and modern activism. It's pretty amazing.
It makes you think, what if that perspective was the key to solving our environmental problems? If more people saw nature as sacred and interconnected, maybe we'd be more motivated to protect it.
It's an interesting thought, but some people argue that just emphasizing a spiritual connection with nature isn't enough. To really deal with the systemic problems causing environmental damage, we need concrete action, policy changes, and a shift in economic priorities.
You're right. It's not just about changing individual mindsets. We have to tackle the bigger systems, too. So let's talk about another side of neo-paganism, its connection to social justice.
Right, with its emphasis on goddess worship and female spiritual leadership. Neo-paganism often goes against the patriarchal structures. Those prevalent in many mainstream religions. This makes it attractive to people who feel marginalized or excluded by traditional power dynamics.
And we're seeing that reflected in who makes up neo-pagan communities, right? They seem to be more inclusive and welcoming of diverse gender identities and sexual orientations.
Exactly. A lot of neo-pagan groups actively promote inclusivity. They create spaces where people who might have felt excluded or judged by more traditional religious institutions can find belonging and acceptance. This alignment with social justice values, it's definitely contributing to neo-paganism's growing appeal, especially among younger generations.
So how is this movement, which has its roots in ancient traditions, adapting to the digital age? Are we seeing like cyber covens and virtual rituals?
Oh, absolutely. The internet has become crucial for neo-pagans to connect, share knowledge, and overcome geographical limitations. We're seeing online communities thriving, virtual gatherings for rituals and ceremonies, and even apps for things like tracking the moon phases and doing tarot readings. It's fascinating to see how these ancient practices are being reinterpreted and brought into the digital world.
It's like technology is both a bridge and a potential problem. It makes things more accessible. But it also raises questions about authenticity, misinformation, and the potential for exploitation.
You're right. As with anything online, it's important to be critical of digital neo-paganism, to figure out which sources are reliable and which ones might be harmful. It's also worth noting that not all neo-pagans embrace technology in the same way. Some prefer to stay grounded in the physical world, putting more emphasis on tangible rituals and direct connection with nature.
So there's a whole range of approaches,
Mhm.
from those who are all in on the digital world to those who stick to a more traditional path. Now, this next topic is um, a bit more sensitive, and we need to approach it carefully. We've seen a rise in conspiracy theories lately, and I'm curious about how these theories might intersect with neo-pagan beliefs.
It's complicated, and we need to look into it more. There's no solid evidence that conspiracy theorists are infiltrating neo-pagan groups. But there are some potential overlaps that we need to be aware of. For example, some conspiracy theories use spiritual and mystical elements, which could be appealing to people who are looking for alternative explanations for world events.
Are you saying that the focus on personal experience and intuition in neo-paganism might make people more open to believing conspiracy theories?
It's a possibility. Conspiracy theories often rely on anecdotal evidence and personal interpretations. They reject mainstream narratives and experts. This emphasis on individual intuition, or gnosis, could potentially line up with how some neo-pagans view knowledge.
That's worrying. It suggests that misinformation and harmful ideologies could spread within neo-pagan communities.
It's definitely something to watch out for. It's really important for people in these communities to think critically, to question their sources of information, and to be aware of the potential for manipulation and exploitation.
So how do we balance respecting the diverse beliefs within neo-paganism with addressing the potential risks associated with conspiracy theories?
It's tricky, and there are no easy answers. Open dialogue, education, and a willingness to challenge harmful ideologies are all crucial. It's also important to remember that the vast majority of neo-pagans are peaceful. They love nature, and they want to live in harmony with the world around them.
Okay, let's take a break here to digest all this information. When we come back, we'll keep exploring the fascinating world of neo-paganism, focusing on its impact on modern society, its relationship with technology, and the challenges it faces in a rapidly changing world.
So you were just talking about how neo-paganism and the digital world are connected. It's a place full of opportunities and challenges.
You talked about cyber covens and virtual rituals. Can you tell us more about how technology is shaping neo-pagan practices?
Well, technology lets people in remote areas, or those who might not feel comfortable joining a group in person, to connect with others who share their beliefs. Online forums, social media groups, and even apps provide spaces to learn, share rituals, and build community.
What about using technology for things like divination or spell work? Are there apps for that?
Oh, yeah. There's an app for almost everything these days, and neo-pagan practices are no different. You can find apps to track the moon phases, get tarot readings, access digital grimoires, and even make virtual altars. Although some people who practice neo-paganism, they question if using technology for these things is really effective. They say it takes away the physical and energetic connection. That's so important to traditional practices.
So there's this tension between embracing technology
Mm-hmm.
and keeping those traditions authentic.
Exactly. It's a balance that everyone has to figure out for themselves. Some people see technology as a way to improve their practice, while others prefer to stick with a more traditional approach.
Speaking of tradition, one of the most visible examples of digital neo-paganism is the TikTok witches. What do you think about that?
Well, TikTok witches have definitely helped make neo-paganism more popular, especially among younger people. They make witchcraft seem more accessible, aesthetically pleasing. They kind of strip away some of the more complex stuff and focus on practical tips, spells, and self-empowerment.
But some people say this oversimplification makes neo-pagan beliefs and practices seem trivial. Do you agree?
I think it's a valid concern. Social media's bite-sized format might not be able to convey the philosophy and ethics that are so important to a responsible practice.
So it's important to look deeper, beyond the surface-level trends, and to find reliable sources of information.
Right. It's crucial to remember that neo-paganism isn't a one-size-fits-all thing. There are tons of different beliefs and practices, and not everything you see on social media is accurate.
Let's move on to the influence of neo-paganism on society, especially its connection to social justice movements.
Yeah. Neo-paganism's focus on inclusivity, diversity, and challenging traditional power structures. It aligns with a lot of social justice movements. The reverence for the feminine divine, the acceptance of different gender identities and sexual orientations, and the focus on building community. They all create spaces where marginalized individuals often feel more welcome and empowered than they do in more traditional religious settings.
Are there any specific examples of how neo-pagan groups are actively involved in social justice activism?
Absolutely. Many neo-pagan groups are involved in different types of activism, from advocating for environmental protection and LGBTQ+ rights to protesting against racial injustice and systemic oppression. Their spiritual beliefs often guide their activism. They see the fight for social justice as an extension of their commitment to making the world a more harmonious and equitable place.
That's really interesting. It seems like neo-paganism provides a way to combine spirituality and social action.
Exactly. For many neo-pagans, their spiritual practice is part of their everyday lives and how they interact with the world. Their beliefs guide them and motivate them to work towards positive change.
Earlier, we talked about the potential connection between neo-paganism and conspiracy theories. Could this tendency toward activism and challenging established systems make some neo-pagans more susceptible to certain conspiracy narratives?
Yeah, that's possible. Conspiracy theories often thrive on distrust of authority and mainstream narratives. This skepticism can be good in some cases, but it can also lead people down a rabbit hole of misinformation and harmful ideologies.
So how can people within neo-pagan communities deal with this?
It's important to develop critical thinking skills, carefully evaluate sources of information, and be aware of any biases or agendas that might be influencing the information. It's also essential to have open dialogue, respectful debate, and be willing to challenge beliefs that could be harmful.
This leads us to another interesting connection, the relationship between neo-paganism and environmentalism. We talked about this a bit earlier, but can we explore it further?
Sure, the deep reverence for nature in neo-paganism, the interconnectedness of all things, and the belief in a living earth all align with the core principles of environmentalism. Many neo-pagans see protecting the environment as a spiritual obligation, not just a political stance.
Can you give us some examples of how this is reflected in their practices and activism?
Well, many neo-pagans try to live in a way that's good for the environment, like reducing their impact on the planet and adopting sustainable practices. They might also join protests against industries that damage the environment, or advocate for policies that protect natural resources.
What about the role of ritual in their environmental activism?
Ritual is a big part of neo-paganism, and that includes their environmental activism. They might perform rituals to honor nature spirits, bless the land, raise awareness about environmental issues, or invoke the power of nature for healing and protection.
Do these rituals have any real impact beyond being symbolic?
That's open to interpretation. Some people might see these rituals as purely symbolic, while others believe they have a real effect on the energy of the world, maybe influencing the flow of energy and contributing to positive change.
So the connection between neo-paganism and environmentalism is pretty complex.
Yeah, it involves personal practices, activism, and a deep spiritual connection to nature. And it's becoming more and more relevant as we face the climate crisis. The way neo-pagans view nature, interconnectedness, and the need for ecological balance. It gives us valuable insights into how we could rethink our relationship with the planet and create a more sustainable future.
So as we continue this deep dive, we need to think about how all these different aspects, the digital influence, the connection to social justice, the environmental activism, are all coming together to shape the future of neo-paganism. But first, let's take a minute to think about what we've learned so far. What do you find particularly interesting or surprising?
Well, what I find most striking is how dynamic neo-paganism is. It's not a belief system that's stuck in the past. It's constantly evolving and changing with the world, and it's engaging with current issues in meaningful ways.
I'm also fascinated by the tension between using technology and preserving traditional practices. It seems like neo-paganism is dealing with this just like so many other aspects of modern life.
You're absolutely right. It reflects the bigger struggle we all face.
Yeah.
Trying to keep up with technology while also holding on to what's important from the past.
When we come back, we'll continue our exploration of neo-paganism, going deeper into its complexities, its challenges, and its potential to contribute to a more just, sustainable, and spiritually fulfilling world.
So we've talked a lot about neo-paganism, its core beliefs, how it's using technology, and its connections to social and environmental movements. It's definitely a belief system with ancient roots that's still relevant today.
Yeah. We've seen how it can be empowering, especially for people who feel marginalized by traditional religions. Its focus on personal experience, intuition, and the connection to nature really resonates with people who are looking for a spiritual path outside of those established institutions.
Right.
But it has its challenges too, doesn't it? We've discussed the risks of misinformation, the complexities of the digital world, and the importance of critical thinking, especially when it comes to the influence of conspiracy theories.
You're right. Those are important things to consider. Anyone interested in neo-paganism needs to be cautious and discerning. But we also shouldn't stereotype an entire movement. The vast majority of neo-pagans are peaceful people who want to grow spiritually, connect with something bigger, and live in harmony with the world.
One thing that keeps fascinating me is this idea of taking ancient wisdom and making it relevant for today. The way neo-pagans are incorporating technology, engaging in social activism, and reinterpreting ancient rituals for modern times. It's really innovative.
It shows how adaptable and resilient these traditions are. Neo-paganism isn't stuck in the past. It's alive, it's evolving. It's like a tapestry woven from ancient wisdom and modern ideas. And its future depends on the choices and actions of the people who practice it.
So as we wrap up our deep dive, I'm wondering what you think the future holds for neo-paganism. What trends do you see emerging? And what kind of impact could it have on the world?
It's tough to say for sure, but there are signs that neo-paganism will keep growing. People are becoming disillusioned with traditional institutions, there's a growing awareness of environmental problems, and people are searching for meaning and purpose in a world that feels increasingly complex. All of these factors could contribute to its continued growth.
Do you think it could become more mainstream? Could it move beyond the fringes?
It's possible, as more people learn about neo-paganism and its values, some of its core principles, like reverence for nature, interconnectedness, and personal empowerment, might become more widely accepted and integrated into mainstream culture.
That raises some really interesting questions about how neo-paganism might interact with other belief systems. Could we see ideas and practices blending together, leading to new hybrid spiritualities?
It's already happening in some ways. The lines between different spiritual paths are becoming blurred. A lot of people identify as eclectic or spiritual seekers. They draw inspiration from a variety of sources. Neo-paganism, with its emphasis on personal experience and openness to different perspectives, could play a big role in shaping these new spiritual landscapes.
This brings us back to what we set out to do in this deep dive. We wanted to understand neo-paganism, why it's making a comeback, and how it's affecting society. What are the key takeaways you'd want our listeners to remember?
Okay, so first, neo-paganism isn't just one thing. It's a mix of different traditions, each with its own unique aspects and focus. Second, its resurgence is due to a combination of things, like people losing faith in traditional institutions, a longing for spiritual connection, and a desire for empowerment and personal growth. And lastly, its impact on society is wide-ranging. It influences everything from environmental and social justice movements to how we see our relationship with nature and the divine.
As we finish this exploration, I'm left with a feeling of wonder and possibility. Neo-paganism offers a vision of a world where we live in harmony with nature, celebrate diversity, and embrace personal empowerment. It's a vision that, in many ways, aligns with what so many people are looking for: a more just, sustainable, and spiritually fulfilling world.
I agree. Whether or not someone identifies as neo-pagan, there's a lot we can learn from its philosophy and practices, its emphasis on interconnectedness, reverence for nature, and the power of personal transformation. Offers guidance for navigating the challenges of the 21st century and creating a more meaningful and harmonious way of life.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into neo-paganism. We hope you found it insightful and interesting.
If you like this episode, please subscribe to our channel, like this video, and leave a comment below sharing your thoughts and questions. We love hearing from you.
And as always, thank you for listening to VSO W.